right. Well, hello. I think this is episode 12. I think that's right. And yeah, it's me and Craig right now. So we'll see if anybody joins in. And yeah, this is my first session after the American election, which is it's a very tumultuous time in the United States for about half the people. So when I pull on analogy today, I might be colored by that a little bit. Yeah, and I'm really looking forward to doing this work today. It's coming at a good time. But welcome, it's nice to see you. Okay, so starting on the page, top of page 64 in on the path. So, excuse me, in telling his own story, the Buddha was not motivated by the desire common at present to simply tell what it felt like to be me. He gives very few details of his personal life, mentioning his luxurious and refined upbringing, simply to prove that when he talks of the drawbacks of sensual pleasures, he's talking from experience. Aside from that detail, he recounts only the events and decisions of universal import. He tells his story as a way of teaching Dhamma that others can apply in their own lives, regardless of race, gender, or cultural or economic background. And the lessons in Dhamma begin with the role that many of the supplementary factors for the path played in his own search for awakening. Yeah, the role of another voice, the role of someone else. And also, again, kind of reiterating the importance of thinking with some mindfulness about who is actually in your social circle. Kind of once again, going back to that idea of feeding, what we're feeding, everything is feeding the fabricated state. So anyway, that's kind of what's getting got at here with, the supplementary factors. His original impulse to seek awakening was inspired by a sense of heedfulness, realizing that he had been complacent in his search for happiness, and that a life devoted to the pursuit of things subject to aging, illness, and death was a life wasted. Later, in reflecting on this realization, he compared the arising of heedfulness to the act of sobering up from an intoxication. Wow. This is really powerful. We talked about this last week. Again, going back to this idea of this sense of urgency. And it's kind of its relationship to heedfulness. That kind of, our heedfulness perhaps is contingent upon the sense of urgency at which we're approaching this path. And then, earlier sections, Buddha talks about what he looks for in students. He looks for that sense of urgency. And so again, I think I mentioned in earlier episodes or whatever that I keep wanting to say Ken Kesey, but I know that's not right. There's the book that introduced me to Siddhartha Gautama, and I think I posted it somewhere. You'll find it in the Discord server. Is just a really excellent book, but it's a fiction. But at the same time, it's an intellectual fiction. The guy clearly, understands a thing or two about Buddhism. I mean, that's clear in the writing. So if you read that book, which I think is really accessible, they even used to teach it, like in world religion classes, which I thought was really cool in the United States, and at least at the college that I went to. Is that, Buddha, and again, talked about this before, he was born into a high social class or caste, a warrior caste class or whatever. And he was wealthy. He was shielded and protected from the realities of life, quite deliberately by his father, and he was being preened and prepared to, to do his duty. And, the story goes, he went out with his, I don't remember what the role of the person was, but he went out against his father's orders into the city and saw people in the dying state. And, how unattractive and terrifying that state probably is to witness, right? And it shattered his fabricated sense of what's real, what reality is. Heedfulness grew to urgency when he reflected on the pointless conflict of life around him. In this way, his movement from heedfulness to urgency parallels the contemplation in Sutta 38, where contemplating one's own mortality gives rise to heedfulness. And contemplating the universality of mortality gives rise to the terror of urgency. Yeah, this is why there are practices, very ancient practices in early Buddhism. And I have experienced these practices, and I continue to do these meditations today. And I will continue to, because I am closer to dead than alive. I am in my 50s, which means I'm going to be on this planet a lot less years than I'm going to be not on this planet in this life, if you do the karma thing. So from a Buddhist perspective, contemplating your death and kind of coming to really see, meditation, right? The meditation is an action, right? And so again, I'm sure as we go through this book and we unpack each stone and the Eightfold Path, and we start to get into meditation practices, right mindfulness, right concentration, right effort, you can't really get at. I'm trying to think of a good analogy for this that is as universal as the Eightfold Path was designed to be. I think that we probably, no matter where you live or who you are, where you come from, what your fabricated state is, right? Going back into earlier sections. I mean, I think that we can all recognize that there are some things that we just can't really truly emotionally experience. I mean, we might be very full-hearted. We might have profound willingness to experience cognitive and emotional empathy. And maybe if you're doing a good practice, maybe you can even get to compassionate empathy, But I think the only way you can get to any of that is, I know it sounds morbid, but I just don't know that there is any other way short of actually dying that you can experience the sheer terror of your own death. And I get that just sounds so morbid. I think there's so many aspects of Buddhism that the West just profoundly just does not understand. And so oftentimes the things can get left out in the telling, but it can be adapted, it can, and people have adapted it. Technology has yet to save us from our own death, right? And I talked about this in the last episode. So here he's getting on about it again. He's getting on about this idea again. Heedfulness grew to urgency when he reflected on the pointless conflict of life around him. In this way, his movement from the heedfulness to urgency parallels the contemplation. So again, imagine, right, that you've been living sheltered, sequestered away in your life, and you've never maybe experienced for yourself or observed or witnessed suffering. Maybe you've never seen anyone die. Maybe you've never had anyone close to you die. Maybe you've never been hungry. Maybe you've never feared for where you would get your next meal or where, right? So these, again, thinking about the Buddha's time, right? Think about when he was alive. Think about the caste system, which was what was prevalent at that time. And in a way, Buddhism was kind of like a punk rock FU to the caste system. Hey, you know what? You don't have to be special to have liberation. Anybody can do this. There's no price tag on finding unbinding from the fabricated state. So radical, right? Anywho, I'm going off the rails. Let me get back to it here. So this sense of urgency was followed by a quality that is not given a name in the Buddha's autobiographical accounts. but which other suttas call confidence, pasada, the uplifting belief that it is possible through developing skillfulness to find a way to the deathless. So this, if you've been listening to any of the, my ramblings as I try to work through this just wonderful book, is that this is where I am truly a cultural tourist in terms of Buddhism, and wholly recognizing that Buddhism, is a religion, that again, I realize that there's so many different views on this. It would be impossible to not offend someone. So again, I am always trying to be careful and just saying that, hey, look, I grew up in the West and I grew up in a secular home. I grew up not ever believing in any kind of higher power whatsoever. I did not grow up in a home that told me there was one. And I was encouraged to explore for myself what the meaning of life was. And I had an interest in it really young, from a really young age. We have, hello, talking about something a little bit morbid here, talking about, so I'll just kind of read this passage that I just read. This sense of urgency was followed by a quality that is not given a name in the Buddha's autobiographical accounts, but which other suttas call confidence, pasada, the uplifting belief that it is possible through developing skillfulness to find a way to the deathless. And I was just explaining that I grew up in the West, and that I also grew up in a secular home. I have been following Buddhism and the Eightfold Path for a couple of decades, but when it comes to karma and the more kind of supernatural aspects of karma, that is a difficult cognitive challenge for me, and one that I just, what I've said earlier, anytime I'm reading any kind of Buddhist texts that kind of get into karma, I can say that I recognize that there is so much that I don't know, and so I can be okay with that. And B, my scientific mind can recognize that my behavior does indeed elicit results. And so in a way, that's kind of how, so karma is a struggle for me that I continue to work with. I'll say that how this applies to my practice as more of a secular Buddhist, again, just because of the way that I grew up, was not conditioned. I was not fabricated from a young age on the social conditioning of religion. So it's hard for me to just naturally go for karma. It's just not a natural reach. Is again, I talk about in other episodes that, and this was in the last episode as well, is that I actually have a background in addiction. And so that sense of urgency that the Buddha wanted to see in his pupils and that he himself experienced, the urgency for me was wanting to become free from addiction and actually getting pretty bottomed out with my addiction. And so, that's kind of what the urgency was for me. Here talking about how, and I would agree that, last week, or if you look earlier in this chapter, he talks about complacency and how easy it is to become complacent, and the different mechanisms that practitioners of the Eightfold Path use, and that, he recommends, including these supplementary factors of internal and external factors of another voice or friends that, like friends that you can go back and kind of read that, like previous couple pages. But, I think what I was just saying, actually, just a little bit ago before you came on, was when you actually meditate on your death, and I know it sounds a little bizarre, but, there are meditations that actually have the practitioner contemplating kind of how gross the body is, and pardon my French, I'm doing this for effect, not to offend, okay? We shit, we fart, we pick our nose, when you really think about it, and I really am doing that for effect, we're gross. there are meditations that ask the practitioner just to kind of contemplate that, and it's not. They're there for a very precise reason. It's that idea. Again, you're going to hear in the again, this interpretation is coming from Pāli Canon, but this idea of urgency. If you don't have this sense of urgency, you can become complacent. If you don't have this sense of urgency, you can become complacent. And so how can you manufacture a sense of urgency? Like, let's say, okay, so great. So you get sober. Great. Right? This is why, the success of the 12-step program is only like 5 or 6%. And that's really sad. And I think it's not, but, it's not a judgment. It's more like I think that we're kind of hardwired. And I think that this is what, the Buddha talked about in these early teachings, is that our fabricated state, the aggregates and our attachment, our identification with all of this, it's almost like we're just hardwired to get complacent. I don't know. I'm not saying that's what he said, but sometimes that's what it feels like to me. It's almost like I have to have these mechanisms in place to make sure that I don't become complacent. And so this is why I meditate every day, and again, in the Eightfold Path, it's not about good or bad, right or wrong, awake or not awake, conscious or unconscious, or at least for me, how I interpret it. And again, I always welcome anyone to please, if you, especially, again, if you come from this culture and you're well acquainted with this, document, the way consisted of applying his powers of observation to his actions, posing questions in terms of appropriate attention, and in being truthful in answering those questions. So again, going back to the earlier section, right? This radical idea. Hello. This radical idea, and let's see if this is a new. Hi. Talking about something a little bit morbid here, talking about, why in Buddhism, it's a good idea to maybe meditate on your death, on the fact that, someday we're going to grow old and someday, we're going to die. You came in on a real party, right? I'll see if you write anything here. And if not, you're most welcome. And to listen or to chat, great. I see you're typing, so I'll just kind of stand by for a sec. Right on. Okay, well, I'll just keep on going. And so the way consisted of applying his powers of observation to his actions, posing questions in terms of appropriate attention, and in being truthful in answering those questions. And what I was just saying, just as you popped in, is that last week, we were talking a little bit about how important the Buddha said truthfulness was. And this idea that, he talks about these supplementary to the Eightfold Path, these supplementary internal and external factors. And one of those external factors is other people's voices. And again, you can kind of see this if you scroll up. I think it's on page 62 or 63. And part of it was this idea that if we aren't truthful with ourselves, we can't be truthful with someone else. And if we can't be truthful with someone else, we may not develop the momentum that's kind of required. That urgency. Sorry, it's in the last episode, I guess. But so I think that's what he's getting at here. Let me just check the chat because I think somebody else might have come in. Hello. So this quality of truthfulness was particularly dramatic in his decision to abandon his austerities. Even though he had devoted 6 years to those austerities, enduring extreme hardship, he did not allow his pride to obscure the fact that the path had been a mistake. At the same time, he was able to use the questions of appropriate attention to understand where exactly the austerities were unskillful. Oh, wow. I love this. This chapter, this section is called The Autobiography of the Buddha's Life, and to my understanding, again, I'm a Westerner, But to my understanding, of what I know of, Siddhartha before he became the Buddha, born of high caste, warrior class, sheltered away from the realities of the human experience for most people of his time. Finally got a glimpse, thanks to someone that worked for him, of someone getting out of the city walls to see what was happening, saw someone die, and that kind of sent him on the path of, oh my gosh, what is this? And what do you mean this is what happens to everybody? And then, as the story goes, and feel free to chat if you follow this, and if I get any of this wrong, the story goes that he started with just enjoying all of the sensual pleasures, if you know what I'm talking about, and realized that that's not making him happy. And he's still feeling a lot of suffering, a lot of binding, a lot of attachment, a lot of identification, a lot of not real, authentic liberation. And then he became an ascetic, which was kind of like trending and memeing at the time, apparently. And he didn't eat. He absolutely pushed his body and his mind to the limits of human endurance. And as he's saying right here, he was able to tease apart his pride enough to admit that, okay, that didn't work. That wasn't the way. And so, then what I hear him say is being said in this passage is that now he was able to apply, again, going back to this idea of truthfulness. So, okay, so you admit that it didn't work out. Whoops, okay. There's that self-compassion piece, by the way, for me. That, I think is a big part of Buddhism. The compassion extends to ourselves. I think oftentimes we think compassion applies to other people. Hey, we are other people. We're all people. We're it. We're it. So, oh, great. I see someone typing. Let me scroll down here. The Buddha has unique Dharma. I think renunciation is highly valuable to those in the right circumstances. Oh, awesome. Okay, got it. So, I'll just tell you what I think I'm hearing you say here, and then maybe you can tell me if I got this wrong. You're saying that, and again, earlier, and again, forgive me because I am a Westerner, so this is not natural to me, but earlier, and I don't remember the sutta, but it was talking about the 7 chariots. And I think, am I right to think that what you're talking about is this idea that none of this is wrong because these are entry points. These are entry points to, or am I not, is that not right? Or is there another thing going on? Yes. Okay, great. Awesome. I love that. Oh, yeah. And I'm sorry if I came across as judgy, because I definitely did not mean to come across as judgy. I think I guess the way that I interpret, hello, by the way, welcome. I guess the way, and again, remember, I'm Western, so I do my best. I'm not coming at this from a natural fit. It's very, I think, what did I read that like 1% of Americans are Buddhists. So yeah, so forgive my ignorance where it is. I think for, as you say, his, this idea of Dharma, when I talked about this in the last episode, right now I've become very strident in my practice. If you listen to any of my episodes, I've been talking about over the last couple of years, of living in the United States, that I have been catching myself clinging to Buddhism. I know the irony. Yes, I can laugh with you. I realize what I'm saying. I also feel like, and here's the self-compassionate part, maybe this is just kind of like what you're getting at here, and I won't use names, so I don't want to call anybody out in case you don't want to be in the recording, but I'll just say, ignorance is all there is to forgive. I love that. Thank you. Wink. Yes, wink. Right, exactly, wink. And yeah, I have to be reminded of that. Yeah, of that. And it's kind of like what he's saying right here, this whole idea that, and, if I practice, then I can have some discernment and go, okay, wait a minute now. Let's really think about this here. Is this, I hope I'm making sense. Anyway, let me make sure nobody Is anybody else writing here? Okay. Hi. In this way, the Buddha's autobiographical accounts are an excellent lesson in the power of action. Yes. And in how to put his later teachings on action to good use. He frames his search for the deathless as a search for what is skillful. In other words, the very nature of an act of search means that one is convinced of the power of action and wants to find which actions will help the search succeed. At every step where the Bodhisattva, sorry, I'm losing my place. At every step where the Bodhisattva entered a new phase of his search, the impulse to change came from asking himself, in effect, I am not getting the results I want. Why am I doing this? What if I tried doing that instead? In some cases, that turned out to be a mistake, spectacularly in the case of his austerities. But he never lost his confidence that a skillful way could be found, a lesson that applies to all who follow in his footsteps. Oh man, I love this. This is so making me think of this YouTube video that I saw today. And it was this lovely woman who is a therapist, and she's talking about, and she had like a great clickbait title for her YouTube video. I mean, I went for it. She totally caught me and just hook, line, and sinker. But it was something about how mindfulness is not a great idea, and it's not a good thing, and it's not for everybody. And then, I kind of looked at a lot of the comments, and most of the comments were talking about how it's terrible. It's terrible if you come from a trauma background. It's terrible if you've got anxiety. If you have ADHD, this is terrible. You shouldn't be doing any of this. And agreeing. And then what a lot of the comments were saying in alignment with that is that, to their view, mindfulness makes them feel like they're not getting it right. They're not doing it right. And this just kind of broke my heart a little bit. This to me is, and if you listen to my podcast at all, this is yet another way that I sometimes feel like the West has twisted this beautiful, beautiful universal path. This idea that who told you that there was a right to get to in mindfulness? I mean, what? It just kind of broke my heart to hear that. I saw somebody just come in. Mindfulness is kind of masking it. And there's a question mark. Would you mind telling me more? So are you asking me, do you think that's what they meant? I don't know. I'd have to go back in. I think kind of the sense that I got from the tenor of their comments on this gal's video, was I could really go somewhere dark here and never come back. Or I've read, that this is, and yes, there's definitely, there's so much going on here. I think I even responded to her. I said, gosh, I think I even said, gosh, there's a lot going on here. And I think it goes back to what you put here, person whose name I won't say, that idea of where you are on the path, right? If you're not going back to the 7 chariots, right? And I think I even put in the post, I could not meditate. I come from a high trauma background, gnarly. I didn't even have access to meditation until I had been in therapy for many, many years. And I actually also been on a 12-step program for quite a long time as well, because I was an addict, so it's kind of like our community member said here earlier, we just are where we are. And to my mind, there's so much self-compassion in Buddhism that to think that mindfulness makes you feel like you're not getting it right, then mindfulness, which actually comes from Buddhism, it is one of the steps in the Eightfold Path, has been corrupted for you. And that's bums me out. So that's the ego puffing itself up to scare you out of meditation. A worthy adversary, no joke. I teach meditation in virtual reality. So I am the first person to say, yeah, whatever it takes to get someone to maybe think about working with their mind. But at the same time, I think it's so important to lovingly and with compassion say, hey, this stuff isn't easy, and it is a good idea to get a teacher, and you don't have to follow the Eightfold Path. But if you're going to start playing with meditation, and I'm assuming that's what they meant by mindfulness. I'm assuming that they meant meditation. Then you probably shouldn't do it all by yourself, especially if you've been diagnosed with a neurodivergent, something like autism perhaps, or ADHD. And there's no judgment here, right? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with you. I'm saying, yeah, there's a lot going on here. And, but it's not mindfulness's fault. It's just that this is an arduous path, you know? Okay, I'm just going to read and see what, like westernized mindfulness. Yeah, I live in the West, and I've been practicing this for a couple decades. I'm closer to dead than I'm alive. That's right. And I don't know. I just I sometimes I'm not saying not everybody, right? But I think sometimes when we take things out of context, when you take things when you just take this idea of mindfulness, which is actually one of the rights in the Eightfold Path, and you just take it out of context. You don't talk about the other. Well, they're together for a reason, and it talks about this earlier in the book too. That they were never designed to be done independently of each other. And I think that this is when stuff like this happens. Is when you start to market, or you start to gain. Can you tell that I have opinions about this? Anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts. I'm so glad that you're talking with me. I don't know much about. Okay, I don't know much about his type of mindfulness. Okay, so I would love to hear what. I know he has an app. I've never. Isn't he one of the first people, I think, to have an app like Calm or Headspace or. Yeah, I know that he's. I do know that he's an atheist. Yeah, and he's also a fan of Buddha. I think I totally hear what you're saying. I love this. Oh my gosh, this is the first time I've had people come and talk with me. And I know you can't see me, but I'm bowing to you, and I appreciate you so much for that. This is such a salient thing that you just put here for me, because I don't want to call myself an atheist, but I am a Westerner, and I did grow up in a secular home. And karma has always been really hard for me. One of the things that I appreciate about the gods in Buddhism is that, from what I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, they're not being worshipped, like some deity. Because that's a hard reach for me, just like it would be a hard reach for Sam. I think and again, this to me goes back to the introduction of this book and the fabrications and the fabricated state and the five aggregates. And we are shaped by all of that. And so supernatural things are not going to come easily cognitively to someone who's grown up in a secular home. So that's challenging for me as well, because I have to work with that all the time. And I think that for me, I have to kind of come back to that idea of beginner's mind when it comes to karma. Okay, that is such a huge mental gymnastics for me to say, full stop. I believe that we just keep coming back over and over and over again. We just keep recycling through, contingent upon the seeds that we're I'm not saying that I don't believe it, but it is not an easy thing for me to wrap my mind around. I did not come up in those views. So and I am a very practical, pragmatic woman. I am not like an emotional arguments are not what works on me. Science works on me. Data works on me. So, and I think that Sam is a neuroscientist also, and I think that he is also, I don't know if you guys are familiar with moral foundations theory, but I think that it's a really kind of an interesting thing to think about, to my mind, when you're thinking about secondary diversity dimensions like religion or belief or faith, because you've got people who value different things morally. Anyway, I'm going off the rails. Feel free to jump in at any time. Yeah, and I can get back to the book too, because I'm more than happy. I love talking, and I also love reading. Yeah, so yes, he is an atheist, and I'm going to guess that Sam Harris does what I do, which is that, I try to go, this is why I was grateful to Nathan for recommending this book, trying to kind of get into translations of the Pāli Canon, which, to my understanding, when you get way back there, they're pretty secular, in the sense that he doesn't talk about, it just doesn't come up. It's just not, am I wrong? And I would really seriously welcome, or if you have resources to point me to, because again, I am not a native of this tradition. I was taught by Westerners. Not to say there's anything wrong with that, right? But, it's like that telephone game where, kind of far removed here. Meditation. Yeah. Meditation, I think, is one of those things where, and again, going back to the chapter here, right? Kind of just leaving off on this idea of, and that's another thing that I love about Buddhism is, in my understanding, looking at the Pāli Canon, and it's, my understanding is kind of being reinforced here in this book, is that Buddha was all about action. Do it. Follow the steps. Can you tell that I'm like the Enneagram thing, right? But like you said, person whose name I will not say, that's apparently where I'm at, right? With the 7 chariots. But I do appreciate that, admittedly, that there's this radical, doesn't matter what your caste is, what your social class is, how much money you make, who you are, where you are, you can, to the best of your ability, follow this path. You can learn how to meditate, and it is a practice, and you can dedicate yourself to it. And it's hard. The Buddha makes no bones about that in the Pāli Canon from the looks of it, but I think sometimes in the West, I don't hardly ever hear anybody say that it's hard. Because who wants to hear that, right? But to me, that's just like, then you're not, you got to tell the truth. I think people are grown-ups, they can take it, yeah, this is going to be hard. Like, so I haven't been a teacher for 20 years. Okay. And so I would always tell my students this, it's like, hey, think about it. Just think about it. Isn't anything worth having hard to kind of get to? Like, think about every basketball player you love or every great musician that you love. How do you think they got so great? So I don't know why we shy away from telling people that it's going to be hard and that it's going to take practice, as if doing something difficult and practicing were a bad thing. It's not, it's not. It's a part of life. Doing hard things is excellent. It's how you grow. It's how you evolve. It's how anyway, right on. We got some typing going on. Okay, well, I'll come back to you, other person whose name I won't say, and I'm just going to read a little bit more, okay? But I see you, and I'm going to come right back to you here, just to kind of keep us moving a little bit here in the book. The Bodhisattva was able, and forgive me if I'm saying things wrong too, was able to compensate for this lack of admirable friendship by being exactingly truthful in observing his actions, and by developing 2 strong forms of heedfulness: discontent with skillful actions, an unwillingness to rest content with anything but the deathless. Oh, wow. And the determination to reduce his body to nothing but skin, tendons, and bones if he had not reached the highest goal attainable. Wow. That is just a profound amount of inner resolve. I just can't. That's incredible. Okay, I'm just going to come back and see. Okay, the middle path being the Buddha's discovery. He was unconcerned with the will of a Godhead outside of our own Dharma. Karma is action. Thermodynamics illustrates this in a way we can understand. I love that. Thank you so much. Yeah, I love that. So, sorry if I'm getting this wrong, but I think that maybe it's sounding like what you're saying is it's kind of irrelevant. It's not what he's doing. It's not a function of what he's doing here, which I think is actually what makes it so appealing to me. There was a if you are reading this book and you go back and you look at the suttas from the last chapter, I think my favorite one, and again, I don't remember which number it was, but it's the Road to Radhaga. And again, I'm sorry if I got that one wrong. I love that story. I'm sorry I call it a story, but sutta. I love it. I love that. It's so precise. It's so clear. There's just no room for question. And again, that type A in me, like you said earlier, right where I'm at in the karmic wheel, I guess, appreciates that precision. Action, reaction, yes, yes, indeed, yes, yeah. And so if you have a hard time with the idea of karma from a more supernatural perspective, could you think of karma in this lifetime? Right? Like I think about, I talked about this last week, that I came into this life very, very angry, even as a very young girl. Not angry, but scrappy. In other words, if someone tried to hit me or bully me, I'd punch them in the face. And I was like that as a very little kid. So that was my karma ripening for whatever, who knows, right? So if I have a hard time wrapping my mind around that notion, well, can I recognize that in this lifetime, right? Me, the skeptic, that I'm living in this life. Sarah, can you acknowledge that you're alive? Yes. Can you acknowledge that your anger gets you into trouble? Yeah. Can you acknowledge that your anger alienates you from people that you care about? Yeah. So I think that whole idea of cause and effect, action, reaction, I think that can be a helpful way to think about Buddhism if, as you, kind of work with the idea of a more kind of larger idea of karma, this idea that, that we have a lifetime to, in Buddhism, right, this precious life. We could have come back as a slug, or not that there's anything wrong with being a slug, but we came back, to a Buddhist view, we incarnated in this human body with the ability to cognate. In other words, with the ability to choose the Eightfold Path. And that's a pretty cool big deal, to my knowledge, from what I understand of, the Buddhist view. And so it's a call to action, this precious life. And I think when you can remember that and meditate on your death and your demise, which for some of you, that's what if you read back earlier in the chapter, it's talking about why do we meditate on death? And, some traditions of Buddhism, I remember the first meditation on death that I did, we meditated that crows were picking out our eyes. Yeah, it was, I know that sounds, but the function of that meditation was to help us to kind of experience the psychological presence, which you can induce through deeper states of meditation, and really kind of feel like you're experiencing the word they used earlier in the chapter, terror, horror. Now, those words are a little rough for me because they're very emotional, and like I said, I'm not a big fan of theatrical things, so I have to kind of interpret those for myself in a little bit of a different way. But but he also uses the word urgency, and I think that word makes more sense to me. In this way, he discovered the middle way through a level of heedfulness that was anything but moderate. And even though the Buddha later recommended that his followers develop the same degree of heedfulness and determination, their path is considerably lightened by the fact that he survived his search. I love that. And succeeded, so that he could act as an admirable friend. Again, going back and looking at the supplementary internal and external factors, okay? That admirable friend to give confidence and guidance to all who embark on the noble search in his wake. And I love that. And somebody said that earlier in the chat here. Let me go back and find this when we were talking about that YouTube video. And that's the ego. Yeah, back here where it was getting into, masking it, or that's the ego puffing itself up to scare you out of meditation. Yeah, that's kind of, I think, what this book is, that this section's kind of getting at. But it's repeated over and over and over and over and over again, quite literally in the suttas, right? That the mind really is a really worthy adversary. I'm remembering the first time I went on a really long retreat. It was one of those ones where, you stop eating at 12 and you get up at 4 and you don't make eye contact, you don't speak, and you meditate for 9 hours a day, and you do that for 11 days, and you do break, or at least I did. But I think that the problem isn't the breaking. The problem is that we think that there's a problem with breaking. And I realize that could get me into a lot of trouble, but that is kind of how Buddhism works to a certain degree. Again, please correct me if I'm wrong. There is a certain amount of willingness to just sit through the fire of your mind. That's the introduction of this book. Your mind is a fire, and the Eightfold Path is a fire escape. And so that discomfort that, those people that were commenting on, this woman's just great free content that she was giving, and she was making some excellent points, but there is a certain amount of discomfort that you need to kind of be willing to be okay with. And that's why I also think that if you do have lots of things going on like that, wow, maybe find a mindfulness-based therapist or someone that can kind of help you navigate, particularly like if it's PTSD, right? Because space is not the final frontier. Our mind is the final frontier. And I think most of us are afraid to go digging around in there anyway. And most of us have been repressing things because we're afraid to go in there. Think about Jung. Think about the hero. Think about why that archetype exists in every single culture throughout the world. The hero's journey. The hero has to slay the dragon. Well, you have to be willing, though. You have to be willing, right, to face the dragon. And in Buddhism, there's a certain call to that, right? And but I also realize, again, I'm very sensitive to, hey, and maybe in this life, that's not going to be accessible, and again, I'm going to see if there's anybody in the chat. So let me just come back to this. Okay, watching your thoughts type. Oh, okay. Yeah, so far it's in Tibetan Buddhism. Okay. Yeah, I'm pretty ignorant, really, admittedly. Sorry, everybody. Yeah, I'm not like, there's other book clubs on here where you actually straight up have like scholars, like actual real teachers. I am a lay Buddhist. I am an American lay Buddhist. But I do have a 25-year pretty disciplined meditation practice. And so when it comes to the actual doing of a meditation, I got you. Yeah, so I'm sorry I can't be of help to you there. I don't know. But yeah, hopefully that will help. And I actually don't know what he is. I don't know what Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu, or are you saying that he is a Tibetan? Well, yeah, anyway, I know you'll work that out. Okay, well, thank you. I am bowing to you. I appreciate you. And I hope I will see you next Friday. Yeah, take care. Thank you so much.